Number 10, Chariots of the Gods. Last time, we talked about the connection between the New Gods and the Eternals when it came to godlike superhero teams with mythological and yet cosmic inspirational ties. This time, we are going to talk about where some of those inspirations may have come from, other than the obvious sources of myth and lore belonging to ancient history. Chariot of the Gods is a book from 1968 by German author Erich von Däniken. It's believed to have inspired Jack Kirby somewhat in regards to his creation of the Eternals. The book explores and offers the theory that our greatest technologies and religious beliefs could have actually come from ancient aliens who visited our planet. This theory is still around today and fits with Kirby's exploration and fiction of how aliens from another world could have influenced the creation of our gods, heroes of myth, and even our history. Number 9. Who's Who in the MCU? We talked a little bit about some of the characters who are part of the cosmically superpowered hero group in the comics, but just which Eternals will be appearing in the film? Who will be playing them? And what differences do we know about when it comes to that MCU version of these characters? Gemma Chan, who previously played Minerva in Captain Marvel, will appear again in the MCU, but this time more prominently as Eternal CIRCE. Angelina Jolie is playing Athena, one of the leaders of the Eternals, daughter of Zuras, and assumed to be Greek goddess Athena. Richard Madden is another known Eternals leader from the comics, Icarus. Madden is well known for his portrayal of Robb Stark on Game of Thrones. Kumail Nanjiani is Kingo, initially a samurai warrior turned action film star in the comics, whose character has been altered slightly for the MCU. Kingo, however, will still be a fame-obsessed film star, but well known for his Bollywood film roles instead. Lauren Ridolph will be playing Makkari. In the comics, Makkari was originally male, but the MCU version will be female and is also the first confirmed deaf superhero in the MCU. Super cool. Some people still speculate, of course, that Hawkeye is at least partially deaf, but I don't think that's been confirmed in the MCU yet. Brian Tyree Henry is Phastos, who will be the first superhero to be depicted as openly gay in the MCU. Selma Hayek will be AJAK. AJAK is another character who was originally portrayed as male in the comics, but whose MCU version will be female. Leah McHugh is Sprite, often the most mischievous member of the Eternals. Don Lee is Gilgamesh, who will become quite close with Athena in the film. And the often more villainous Druig will be played by Barry Cogan. And friends, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about the Eternals, be sure to show us by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Marvel Max Comics. Yep, the Eternals had their own explicit Marvel Max series, if you can imagine that. This came to pass in 2003 and was not really tied at all to anything Jack Kirby had created, except that the Eternals appeared to be another race of beings and they were still called the Eternals. There were also still deviants involved, but that's about it. It was hypersexual and violent and about as weird as you could imagine. Maybe even weirder. This version of the Eternals only lasted 6 issues, thank goodness. It was not well received, but fortunately we would get a well-received reboot of the main continuity Eternal series after it in 2006. Number 7, Eternals Volume 3, 2006. Now let's talk about this amazing series. The 3rd volume of Eternals is a 7-issue limited series brought to us by Neil Gaiman and John Romita Jr. It starts off in a very Gaiman mythological fashion, with the Eternals living among humans, seemingly unaware of their powers or their past. Over time, they would come to remember who they were, and it would be revealed of how and why they had forgotten. The covers from the series are also stunning and were done by Rick Barry. When others talk about Circe, or when I talk about her myself, issue number 2's cover from this series featuring her is always the first image that comes to my mind. It's just really iconic. And if you've ever watched anything else where people have talked about Circe, you've probably seen this cover before. These covers are real pretty. Number 6. 100! 100 seems to be the magical number, at least that was what was established in the newest Eternal series. On the title page of issue number 1 of the current series, it is written that the Celestials, upon coming to Earth, created 100 Eternals and 100 Deviants before they left our planet. Likely to make Eternals elsewhere in the cosmos, or go do, well, whatever it is that Celestials feel they need to do when they're not making Eternals or Deviants. Of those 100 Eternals, not all of them are from one area. In fact, they are divided up into kind of regions or factions depending on where they're from or where they are based on Earth, or depending on other Eternals that they find they align with. They tend to congregate. I don't know what that was. Me trying to find the word congregate. Number 5, the Generations. Another way to divide the Eternals is generationally, as not all of them are actually the original Eternals. In fact, many of the main Eternal characters that we are familiar with are actually the offspring of other Eternals. Some Eternals are second or third generation, whereas others are as young as fifth generation. There are those who are born before the fall of THANOS, who are considered first generation, those who were around for Cronus' experiment, presumably born well before it I assume, who we consider second generation, third generation are those born after the experiment, fourth generation were born after what is referred to as the coming of the second host, and finally there are those that were born after the coming of the third host, which are considered the fifth generation of Eternals. 5 generations. I don't know why, but now I'm imagining like the Eternals is like a sitcom, like Full House. It's like all these 5 generations of Eternals trying to coexist in one house. I don't know why I imagine that, but here we are. Number 4, Unimind. When the Eternals get together, they create an entity known as the Unimind. Initially, the Unimind was shown as a genderless being of basically pure energy, who only the leader of the Eternals could bring forth. However, later on, we learned that the Unimind could also be summoned forth when the Eternals were together. I think the minimum you need is 4, which is an oddly specific number, but here we are. And apparently they could do this even if they weren't aware of their true existence as Eternals. This happened while they were living in human form and had been made to forget their true heritage. So we're talking Eternals Volume 3, starts around issue 2, I believe. But we also see the effects of it in issues 3 and 4. The emergence of the Unimind in this instance also helped to reawaken their abilities, reminding them of who they were. Number 3, Olympia. Olympia is the home of the Eternals. It has existed in a few different places on Earth, but is generally located in Greece on the Mount Olympus, but is also often shown as being hidden away there, sometimes subterraneously. Usually it's like you drop down into it. I should clarify actually after that explanation of there being 100 Eternals that the Celestials made, that the Olympian Eternals are generally the ones who call Olympia their home. Makes sense, yeah? This is the futuristic, metallic, and technology-based kind of looking headquarters for the Eternals of Olympia, which is also like what that group is called. Makes sense, because yeah, their home base is Olympia. Often when the Eternals are resurrected, this is where they first awaken again, alive once more, reborn. Number 2, the Avengers. The Eternals and the Avengers are both hero groups, but more than that, they are also both allies to one another and even friends. Some members of the Eternals have even teamed up with or been a member of the Avengers. In fact, both CIRCE and Gilgamesh each served on the Avengers team at one point. CIRCE ended up being offered membership to the Avengers after befriending Captain America. Gilgamesh joined the Avengers for a short time after Captain America had lost his mantle temporarily to US Agent. Although his time on the team was quite brief, he's still believed to be one of the all-time strongest heroes to have served on the Avengers team. Because Gilgamesh, he's a real strong. Too bad he couldn't stay because he was an exiled Eternal. Number 1, main MCU characters. If you're wondering just which Eternals you should be reading up on in preparation for the film, it's been said that Ikaris and Circe are intended to be the main characters of the first Eternals movie. So those are likely the ones you'll want to be well versed in. Circe appears frequently in the first volume of Avengers, starting in issue 308, and appearing on and off till about issue 375. She also is in much of the first and second volume of Eternals. Ikaris appears in all 5 volumes of the Eternals pretty frequently, so you could even start with the newest volume, which started near the beginning of this year, 2021. Ikaris also appears teaming up with the Eternals in Thor in volume 1 of Thor, starting in issue 285 and appearing almost consistently until issue 292. Number 10, New Gods. Eternals being Jack Kirby's creation also have an obvious connection to some other work he had done a few years prior over at DC. Yep, we're talking about the New Gods. The Eternals allowed Kirby to continue to explore similar themes and characters tied to a world steeped in mythos, gods, and of course the cosmic realm of superhero stories. Who doesn't like to get a little bit cosmic, am I right? The Dark Gods were created in 1971 by Jack Kirby, appearing in New Gods issue number 1. The Eternals also made their first appearance in their own book, The Eternals issue number 1 in 1976, and were of course also created by Kirby. Number 9, Thanos. Thanos is actually one of the Eternals, a Titanian Eternal, but one nonetheless. He was born of the last Titan Eternal, Suisan, and the Eternal mentor from Earth. Thanos actually has ties not just to the Eternals, but also kinda to the villains that we believe they'll be seen protecting from Earth in the MCU, the Deviants. Thanos himself was born with the Deviant Syndrome, which is considered a mutation and a genetic predisposition, only believed at this point in time to occur in Titan Eternals. Thanos is believed to be the only Eternal to have ever experienced this genetic mutation. However, while he has been genetically altered by the Deviant Syndrome, don't expect him to show up alongside the Deviants in the MCU. Because although they kind of share that name, Thanos for his condition, the Deviants for their race, they're both pretty separate. I don't know if it'll come up in the MCU that Thanos is technically, like, suffers from the Deviant Syndrome and kind of has that connection, but that would be pretty cool. It'd be pretty cool. Number 8, the Celestials. When it comes to the Eternals, it's important to note that they were part of an experiment devised by the Celestials. The Celestials came to Earth and chose a prehistoric tribe of humans to manipulate and alter with their power and technology. The Eternals were given great cosmic power that also allowed them to learn how to control every atom, every molecule of their being over time. As a result, they also became virtually immortal. Even if they and their body was destroyed and scattered, it was believed that they could resurrect themselves. Or be resurrected. Number 7, the Deviants. The Eternals' main enemies in the film will be the Deviants. But just who are the Deviants exactly? Well, the Deviants first appeared as the enemies to the Eternals way back in their first appearance in Eternals issue number 1, with them also having a retconned first appearance even years before that in 1940 in Red Raven comics. But that was also, of course, before they existed in terms of their character creation, so you can take that one with a grain of salt. They were created by the Celestials at the same time as the Eternals out of prehistoric ape-like human beings, but where the groups of ape-like human beings who were turned into the Eternals were made beautiful and given cosmic power. The Deviants instead had their DNA unstabilized, which resulted in various extreme mutations, which also meant that any children of the Deviants, any offspring they had who managed to live, looked extremely different from their parents. The Deviants were often labeled as monsters and saw the Eternals as their enemies and their rivals. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn even more about the Eternals, let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 6, not alone in the cosmos. As evident with the Titan Eternals, of which Suisan was left as the lone progenitor, the Eternals that we know from Earth were not alone in the cosmos. They weren't alone on Earth as they had the Deviants, and they weren't alone in the cosmos as many other planets of note also had their own subspecies of Eternals. The most easily recognizable alien races who also had their own group of Eternals were the KREE and SKRULL. Both of these groups were created by Celestials who selected a small group of ancient ancestors of those alien races during their visit to their home planets millions or billions of years ago and experimented on them to create the Eternals. Various different alien races of Eternals. Everybody gets an Eternals. You get Eternals and you get some Eternals. Eternals for you in the back. Number 5, the Eternals. Volume 2, 1985. The Eternals have always kind of had a rocky go when it comes to their series getting off the ground floor. But if you are wondering what you should dive into in order to prepare for the film, or if you just want to jump into the wild, immortal, and God-inspired world of the Eternals, you should definitely check out the limited series of the Eternals from the 80s, volume number 2. This series by Peter Gillis and Sam Buscema expands on the lore of the Eternals, fleshing out some key points from their background and their history. Get to know the Eternals a bit better in this 12-issue series. And when you're done with that, maybe you could also go and read Neil Gaiman's The Eternals. That one is also quite short. That's volume 3. I think it's from the early 2000s. Number 4, who are they? Just who are the Eternals though? We know where they came from and we know of other Eternal groups out there in the Marvel cosmos, but who are the Earth hero team that we have come to know as the Eternals? And would we recognize them from myths or history if we saw some of them? Some of the original Eternals were Icarus, who shares connections to Noah with his ark from the Bible, and the Greek hero Theseus. Although I don't know if he actually shares any connections to the character from Greek myth, Icarus, which is kind of weird. Circe, who shares a connection to the mythical sorceress Circe, though the spelling of their names is different. Zuras, often paralleled with the Greek god Zeus. His daughter Athena, often paralleled with the daughter of Zeus and goddess Athena; Kingo, originally a samurai turned famous action film star; Makari, originally the son of the Eternals Varen and Mera, often paralleled with the Greek deity Hermes; Phaistos, who many once thought of as Hephaestus, the blacksmith and weapons forger from Greek mythology; AJAK, son of the Eternals Aima and Eryx, mistaken for the Greek warrior and hero Ajax; Ajax's sibling, Sprite, often mistook as Shakespeare's Puck and literary character Peter Pan; Gilgamesh, who historically was, well, the great leader Gilgamesh, and is often mistook for mythological heroes Samson and Hercules; and the more villainous Eternal Druig, cousin of Icarus, once a famed KGB agent. And that's just to name a few of the Eternals. That's not even all of them, obviously. You also might have noticed that some of their stories, origins, and genders have been changed in regards to their MCU versions. So watch out for that. Should be exciting. Number 3, their purpose. So why did the Celestials create the Eternals, you might be wondering? Was it just a mad science experiment, or a bit of fun for all the powerful cosmic beings? Initially, the Eternals are led to believe that they were actually created to be Earth's heroes and protectors, which is another reason that the Deviants and Eternals come into conflict. The Deviants believe that they were meant to inherit the Earth according to one of their celestial creators. However, this promise was later broken and discarded by other Celestials, and so they wage a constant war against their rival subspecies, the Eternals. In fact, while Eternals are thought of as being mythical heroes and gods throughout history, Deviants have oftentimes also been a part of this mythos, appearing there as the monsters fought against and often defeated or imprisoned in legends. Number 2, their real purpose. Gasp! In 2018, the true purpose of the Eternals was revealed during Jason Aaron's run on the Avengers. In issue number 4, we find out what happened to them and how they killed one another or took their own lives, all because they learned this dark truth. The Celestials had made them protect Earth, but only so they could cultivate it. It turns out that Earth and the Eternals were kind of seen as a potential weapon to be used by the Celestials against the Horde, which are a race of insect-like aliens who are kind of like an opposing force to the Celestials in the cosmos that provide balance. Where the Celestials are seen as being a force of creation, the Horde are a force of destruction. This revelation drove the Eternals mad after believing they were meant to protect the Earth for millennia. In a fit of turmoil, rage, and sheer agony, they destroyed one another and themselves. I guess Eternals are only immortal if they want to be. Number 1, Eternals Volume 5, 2021. JK Lulz, they are just immortal. Recently, the Eternals have returned to the Marvel Universe, coming back to life in the newest Eternal series from 2021. If you want to learn more about why and how they returned, though I mean, remember, they are immortal, I highly recommend checking out this newest series. It's also just visually stunning as well. The newest series is written by Kieran Gillen, with art by Asad Ribish, and vibrant and compelling colors by Matthew Wilson. Ugh, I love Wilson's colors. There are also only 4 issues out right now, so it is a really great time to jump in, catch up, and learn more about the Eternals and their ever ongoing fight against the Deviants. One special and particular kind of Deviant also makes an appearance as their enemy. Trust me, you gotta check it out.
Number 10, comic book origins. Okay, so who are the Eternals? Why are these guys coming in so late? Where were they the whole time? Well, the Eternals made its Marvel debut back in 1976, and their creator, Jack Kirby, actually spent some time at DC before Marvel, like most of the greats do. Now over there he created the new gods, but ultimately Kirby really didn't have that much freedom, so he went to Marvel. And there he was still inspired by these large-scale cosmic sci-fi elements of the new gods, so he began to write the Eternals. So Kirby initially didn't want Eternals to cross over with other Marvel characters. Cut to 2021 and the Eternals are talking about the Avengers in the middle of dinner. And then Icarus says he could maybe lead them and the gang laughs. I mean, one, that's pretty rude, but could he? Will he? Let's find out. Icarus appeared in Eternals issue 1, the Day of the Space Gods. And his name alone should tip you off to a pretty tragic moment in his life, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. Number 9, early life. So Icarus was born 20,000 years ago in Siberia. Only back then it wasn't known as such a thing yet. It was then just the eternal city of Polaria. He was born to 2 members of the Polar Eternals, Veraco and Tullian. Now his birth name is actually unknown until later on. He didn't have a name, but I don't want to call him the dude until like 0.7, so I'm gonna still call him Icarus. so bear with me. So when the second host of the Celestials sank Atlantis, aka the Great Cataclysm, which I'm pretty sure we see in the trailer, one of the first things Icarus the Dude does to aid humanity was guide an ark carrying humans and animal survivors to safety. So Noah's Ark, basically. So that might be a pretty cool intro if they decide to include that scene. Now the humans mistook him for some kind of bird. They're like, is that Rob Stark? Stork? Is it Stork? Is he a bird? Number 8, powers. The Eternals have cosmic energy in their very selves. It makes them pretty unique. And they are in constant mental control of every single molecule. Now, Eternals are pretty much immortal. Even if their molecules are scattered, they can still come back to life. It's pretty OP. They, of course, possess super strength. They can fly. They have telepathy. They can teleport. They can create heat, light, radiation, you name it. They're gods, basically. Now, the thing that makes them unique to watch on the big screen instead of just watching 7 of the same superhero is that Eternals can put all their focus into one of these powers and then decrease the powers of other things. Like one of them is a speedster, for instance. I'd personally be devoted to super speed as well. That'd be great. What about you guys? What would you pick? Comment down below. And before we continue on with this list of Icarus facts, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up while you're here, while you're getting some air, that would be great. It's this one, not this one. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Let's get right back to the list. Number 7, name day. Back in the day of Greek mythology, Icarus was in charge of taking on some deviants while they tried to, oppress humanity. He took on a Minotaur deviant during this time, which is nuts. But while he was there, he met a mortal woman and he fell in love and had a kid. The usual superhero stuff. They had a baby boy and they named him Icarus as well because the name is so great, you have to name him twice. But he wasn't actually named Icarus yet, so the dude named his son Icarus. There we go. So Phastos and Makari, who are being played in the movie by Brian Tyree Henry and Lauren Ridloff, helped Elder Icarus create this flying device because the boy can't fly on his own, mortal mother, woman and all. This isn't invincible, his son can't fly. Also, this isn't invincible at all. Thankfully, but it does get dark. I'm not gonna lie, it gets kind of dark. So while older Icarus was battling deviants around the world, young Icarus was eager to use this flying apparatus, even though his father wasn't done teaching him just how to properly use it. So he flew up and just like the mythology, he flew too close to the sun and bit the bullet. All the while his father was out kicking ass. Now around this time, Icarus and Phastos were watching Hercules save the city from the Hydra. So hopefully we get a little tease in that. I know Hercules and all these gods might get introduced really soon with Thor. So we might be coming full circle. Number 6, the Pyramid of the Winds. Icarus's uncle and other Eternal Phastos created something called the Pyramid of the Winds. Now it was basically the room from The Conjuring, only instead of haunted artifacts from all over the world, it was the most powerful weapons from all over the universe. In issue 19 of Eternals, Droog went to the Pyramid of the Winds to find a weapon that could destroy a Celestial. Now the symbol of the pyramid is actually imprinted on Icarus's brow. It's not usually visible unless he's in a lot of neural pain. So if you see this thing light up on the big screen, something's afoot. Number 5, his costume. Now let's talk more about this costume. He looks so good. In the first trailer, we get that glorious shot at the end where all the Eternals are standing there and they look amazing. His suit from the comics was black and blue, just like that dress that went viral, and no, don't tell me otherwise. So not only does it look flashy, but it also has purpose. There are certain symbols which have a molecular pattern, and to recreate that pattern, well, that was the only way to get into that vault with all those cool weapons. So he's the key to unlocking this thing. Literally. Another feature of this suit was if by any chance an intruder did get in, the suit would glow up. He's got his notifications turned on the suit. That's smart. Number 4, another tragedy. The passing of a father is pretty standard in the superhero life at this point. His father, Viraco, met his fate while battling a mutated earthworm, of all things, about 1,000 years ago. Now this happened while a group of Eternals were setting up camp getting ready for the third host of the Celestials to cause chaos. Now afterwards, Vulcan adopted Icarus as his own son, and for the thousands of years afterwards, Icarus was constantly being trained. Now his only job was to train in order to locate the beacon left behind by the Celestials in Peru. It's a lot of training. I'd be tapped out by year 26 of training, actually, probably. Number 3, memory wipe. The thing is, when you live that long, you see a lot and you learn a lot more. Now, one of the Eternals, Makari, is a speedster, so they're even smarter than the average Eternal. You can see them speed reading in the trailer, actually. But Icarus and his fellow Eternals were once victims of a memory wipe, like Men in Black style. Gone. All because of one Eternal, Sprite. So after this memory wipe, he went by the name of Ike Harris and was immediately caught by deviants, Moryak and Gelt. They vaporized the dude, but like I said, they can't really die, so he kind of just respawned under Olympia. But this time he responded with his memory and powers, more importantly. Then he began assembling the rest of the Eternals, so he teamed up with Makari, great choice of a partner, I'd probably pick them as well, and they went on the hunt for the remaining 90 others. Number 2, wake up AJAK. Sometimes one of the best things you can do for your friend or your roommate is just to wake them up, just go shake them out of their deep sleep. They're gonna love it. So after the Celestials left Earth, that's kind of what Icarus had to do. AJAK, played by Salma Hayek, put themselves in the center of the planet and went to bed. Yeah, they just went to sleep. I mean, these guys are known for laying low, but I think this is a whole new level. I think AJAK wins. So when the Celestials finally returned, Icarus was the one to go in and wake them up. Is her phone on loud? Maybe it's on. Maybe her phone's on loud. Can we just call her? And with the two front and center in that team up shot in the trailer, it's clear that the MCU version will have the pair work together in some way, after her beauty sleep and all. And number 1, he fought Thanos. Okay, one of the biggest questions of this movie is, where have they been this whole time? They try not to interfere with humanity. That's their whole thing. So they just kind of watch from afar. The internet is killing it with memes. It's kind of hilarious. And Thanos is technically an Eternal. Is there a connection here? Will we get a flashback? Probably. In Eternals Volume 5, there was an eternal rebirth, and Thanos was pretty involved in this. So Icarus wakes up, he starts gathering the troops, and Sprite is having a great time, like they are in the trailer as well, just partying it up, living it loud and proud. They meet the rest later on in Olympia, and then they arrive at the fallen capital of the Eternals, THANOS. And on the last page of the first issue, the Mad Titan himself pops out to greet Icarus. So they went at it, and it was pretty epic. It was a crazy fight. They literally fought through time. It lasted for seconds and then through all of history at the same time. It was wild. Things came to a turn when, Thanos ripped Icarus's head off, I'd say. Well, in reality, it was actually Sprite casting an illusion, distracting Thanos while the two made a break for it. So heads are staying on today, folks. Nice try, Thanos. All right, guys, what did we think of that first teaser trailer for the Eternals? Sorry, Eternals, just Eternals now, which sounds a lot better, I'll admit. Kicking off the list at number 10, Celestial Origins. The Celestials, making their first appearance in Eternals issue 1 back in 1976, the Celestials have been seen many times in the MCU and many more of the comics. There were actually billions of Celestials until a weapon known as the God Killer took most of them out. They are powerful extraterrestrial cosmic beings, and they're massive. They're the ones who created the Eternals and the Deviants, who I'll get into a little bit later. So these space gods are around 1,000 feet tall, give or take. We even see the inside of one of their heads up close and personal in the MCU. Massive, massive beings. Now, the first celestial host arrived to Earth a million or so years ago when they created the Eternals and the Deviants, but later on, they were the reasoning behind the existence of mutants, which is a big deal. Creating the mutant gene. The second host on Earth sunk Atlantis, so, a bit less fun. Then the third one got into a fight with the Sky Gods because it wanted the right to toy with humans. Yeah, we're not a big fan of that, thank you. So they aren't exactly the most chill entities out there. Like we've seen in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Star-Lord's father ended up being one of those Celestials, in the form of an angry Kurt Russell. And before we continue with our list, guys, if you could go ahead down below and give us a thumbs up on the video, it helps the studio out quite a bit here. You guys are the best, thank you so much. Now let's get back to the list. Number 9, the Deviants. So the Eternals were created by the Celestials, but the Celestials also created the Deviants. Everybody needs an evil counterpart, right? The Deviants, or also known as the Changing People, are pretty ugly creatures. So each member has a unique physical and or cosmic mutation, some of which allow the individual superhuman abilities. But they don't even come close to the Eternals. So when the Celestials visited Earth millions and millions of years ago, Zeron the Tester, who is the geneticist for the Celestials, experimented on primates, and that's what created the Deviant subspecies. Now this is referred to as the first host event. And then beyond then, in history, the Celestials would then return and monitor our species to decide to modify them or not. Cool, they're just checking up on us. So naturally, while they're treated like this, and the Eternals are these superpowered, sexy beings, no wonder there's a war between them. See, the best part of their origin, maybe the worst, I don't know, it depends, is that initially, the Deviants were thought to be created as food for the Celestials. Yeah, they're midnight snacks. But that's just a story told by a Deviant during the 2006 miniseries, so who knows? Take it with a grain of salt. Like the actual Deviant, take them with a grain of salt. They taste better that way. So they're ugly and they're sometimes food. That's just awful. Number 8, powers. So the Eternals share a similar power. They're pretty much immortal for starters. They live so incredibly long that even Marvel's Kevin Feige said that the movie could span thousands of years. which is pretty interesting. But of course, that's not all. See, disease and poisons don't affect them, nor do extreme temperatures. So if you were to hurt any of them, don't get too used to it because they can regenerate quite fast. They can also absorb oxygen through water. So if you think our big blue planet can at least drown one of them, well, think again. They usually focus in on two incredible abilities. Like for instance, AJAK, who's being played by Salma Hayek, is the leader of the Eternals. And their powers are levitation and flight. And Icarus, played by Richard Madden, aka Robb Stark, his abilities are cosmic energy manipulation and teleportation. So we're going to see quite an array of powers amongst the group, and it's going to be pretty epic. Number 7. Jack Kirby created them after DC. It's pretty normal for actors to play major roles in a DC comic movie and then a Marvel comic movie. But what about comic book writers? Has that ever happened before? Yes. Legend Jack Kirby actually spent a little bit of time over at DC when he created the Fourth World Saga, which included Mr. Miracle, the Forever People, and the New Gods. Now, once he returned to Marvel, he was inspired by the large-scale cosmic sci-fi elements and thus began to write and draw the Eternals, which made its first Marvel debut back in 1976. See, Kirby's idea was to publish it in European-styled volumes, and he didn't want it to cross over with other Marvel characters or events, just to be its own independent thing. So while Jack Kirby launched the Eternals initially, like most comic book events or characters, it ends up being redone in order to grow, or in this case, to get a little bit weaker. So Neil Gaiman reintroduced readers to the Eternals in the early 2000s, and this time around, he put them on modern-day Earth with no recollection of their past or powers. And this is what I think we might see in the MCU a bit. Maybe it'll end like this. Maybe their whole timeline will end, and then at the very end you'll see that it's like taking place during Captain Marvel or some other prequel stuff. Who knows? They can kind of do what they want. They're kind of doing what they want. It's pretty impressive. Number 6, they created the Unimind. The Unimind is the Celestials' greatest gift to the Eternals. It's made of light, mind, and pure energy. Now this is created when a group of Eternals come together and join their intelligence and will. So the Prime Eternal is referred to the member who can summon the ritual, and it's determined who the Prime Eternal is by either heirdom or by combat.
I demand trial by combat.
So they join forces and out comes this giant cosmic brain. I can see this coming out near the end of the movie as well. They just join forces and bam, we have an IMAX 3D CGI brain just pulsing in our face. And then we love it, we'll see it 5 times in a row. Just shooting lasers, whole theater goes nuts, popcorn everywhere, it's gonna be great. Number 5, connection to Thanos. So we've seen the Great Titan get his head cut off, we've seen him turn to dust, but we might just end up seeing even more to him after all. See, in the Marvel comics, it was retconned that both the Titanians and the Uranians were actually Eternals the entire time. So Thanos is now technically an Eternal, which would make for an interesting backstory to learn in this movie. Hope we see that a little bit. The MCU should be going this route because in Avengers Infinity War, the Red Skull refers to Thanos as son of Alars, who is an Eternal. That, and we've also seen a Celestial in Guardians of the Galaxy 1 in full armor, and in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 as, well, Kurt Russell. So I believe in a flashback we'll see more of the Titans' home life, hopefully. Maybe we'll see baby Thanos. And then someone can do Don Cheadle's idea, you know? Number 4, 5 generations of Eternals. The Eternals are divided into 5 different groups. First, there's the first generation, meaning you were born before the fall of Titanos, Titanos being the Eternals' home city. The second generation of Eternals were around during the catastrophic experiment caused by Cronus, who was a first generation Eternal. So that's 1, now 2. Third generation Eternals were of course born after said catastrophic event, and they were around during the coming of the second host, which took place about 20,000 years ago, give or take. Fourth generation Eternals were born after the coming of the second host, and lastly, the 5th generation of the Eternals were born after the coming of the third host, about 3,000 years ago. So their lives play out a lot slower and a tad more confusing than our human generations. We're like, hey, are you 60 yet? You're old. Okay, see ya. Go live in that place. The Eternals are like, what year is it? How old are we? This is crazy. Number 3, early humanity. The powers that the Eternals obtain are quite the spectacle. Early humans saw these powers and are said to be responsible for giving us a handful of our mythological gods. Like the Eternal Makari. He's the son of Varen and Mara, born in Olympia in Greece. Now he's a member of the Eternals Technologist Guild, but he has the ability of super speed. So the ancient Greeks deemed him the legend of being the speedy messenger and god Mercury. He also taught Egyptians how to write, being confused from the Olympian god Hermes. Then there's also, of course, Icarus, with a K, whose abilities were to fly super fast and super high, and he became known as the ancient hero Icarus, with a C. which refers to Greek mythology when Icarus flew too close to the sun and the wax that joined his wings were melted and he fell from the sky. So these things come from the Eternals. Number 2, limitations. While it's cool to be pretty much immortal and all, every being has their limitations in some way, be it physical or moral. In the recent retcon of the Eternals, there's a limitation on their power, and I hope this is the same for the upcoming movie. So they're programmed so that they cannot attack their celestial masters for any reason. Any attempt to do so will result in the Eternal shutting down. It's the defense mechanism of the Celestial's armor to thank for that. Another interesting rule here is that if a being attempts to attack a Celestial or engage in any way with it with hostility, the Eternals have to defend it. Even the dreaming Celestial from the comics, although if it did wake up, it would mean the end of life on the planet, but they still had to defend it by program. And number 1, KREE and SKRULL connection. The history of the Eternals ended up explaining a lot of backstory for Marvel's finest, including the mutants. But there's other alien races out there that the Celestials did experiments on in all parts of the universe, not just humans. And not just Earth. Like the SKRULLs and the KREE. That's right, now we're seeing in the MCU these two races after Captain Marvel introduced us to them, so the experiments put on the KREE actually inspired them to do experiments of their own, which led to the creation of the Inhumans. The SKRULLs also being a creation from the Celestials makes you wonder whether or not we'll see all this tie together neatly in the MCU, or will the movie go more of a Jack Kirby route and keep it separate, kind of keep it its own thing. Honestly, I'd be okay if it was just its own movie and didn't connect to anything else. My brain already hurts trying to wrap up what's going on with WandaVision and how that plays out in the MCU with other characters like Monica Rambeau and what's going on there. My head already hurts, so keep it up and away and we're good. Although we know Marvel likes to connect things even when they don't necessarily have to.
Number 10, CIRCE. CIRCE went by another name prior to the modern era. In the past, she was known as Circe. Okay, so it's the same name, but spelled differently. Circe from Marvel Comics is typically spelled S-E-R-S-I, whereas Circe, the great sorceress of legend, is spelled C-I-R-C-E. I also feel like there's another way you can pronounce that version of the name, but I can't remember it off the top of my head, I'm sorry. But if y'all got that mythological knowledge in your brains and you want to share the pronunciation with me in the comments, please do. I feel like I once knew of a different pronunciation for it, but I've since forgotten. And if you are familiar with your mythology, yes, we are talking about the same Circe who fell in love with Odysseus after running into him during the events of the Odyssey, and held him and his men hostage on her island when they became stranded there. Circe turned his men to pigs, but left Odysseus alone as she fell in love with him. She kept him with her for a year, but eventually decided to let him resume his journey. Number 9, first appearance. At least I'm pretty sure this is Circe's first ever appearance, but it actually happened prior to the character being properly created and introduced in the Eternals issue number 1, which would be like her other first appearance. This is because we would later come to know that Circe went by another name during her immortal life. As we discussed in our last point, that name was Circe, same name but just spelled differently. Well, in this form, she's the one responsible in mythos for closing Pandora's box after it was opened and released great evils on the world. And by evils, I really mean kind of cute looking imps drawn by Jack Kirby. Possibly these could be deviants, I don't know. This bit of her backstory as Circe, the great sorceress, was revealed before we'd actually know of her true identity in a flashback from Strange Tales issue 109, which came out in 1963. And I believe Eternals issue number 1 wouldn't happen until 1976. So it'd be only after we learned of that history, we'd be like, oh, that would have been Circe then. Pretty neat. I like retcons like that because I think retcons like that are just fun. Those are fun. Number 8, Black Knight. While Circe is presented in the Eternals film as being the true love of Icarus, in the comics there is another hero that she is well known for being connected to romantically. I don't know what this is. This is romance, apparently. Circe ends up in love with the Black Knight, Dane Whitman, also slated to appear in the film, played by Kit Harington, who is known for his role as Jon Snow in HBO's Game of Thrones. Dane Whitman was in love with Crystal, but also had feelings for Circe, which meant the three ended up in a sort of love triangle for a while. Love triangle. I need to do a top 10 list on comic book love triangles because I feel like there's a lot of those. Number 7, Party Girl. CIRCE loves throwing parties. It's just her way. In fact, parties were considered such a big part of her life that when all the Eternals were made to forget who they truly were by Sprite as revenge, CIRCE became a socialite and party planner. Even with her mind kind of wiped of her past lives, her love of parties remained and ultimately became her career of choice. And she was in such denial of being an Eternal that she actually preferred to live her life as she had been, initially refusing to confront the truth of her identity and go back to living a life as a hero and an Eternal. I wish I could go to one of CIRCE's parties. I wonder if we'll actually get to see these parties in the movie or not. I'm pretty excited to see if Gemma Chan's gonna be like partying it up as CIRCE, because that would be pretty cool. There's gotta at least be like one rager that she throws in the movie. Please, let it happen. Number 6, Avengers. CIRCE could also be the link we've been looking for in the Eternals film to connect it to more of the rest of the MCU. In the comics, CIRCE is a friend of the Avengers and even ends up helping the team from time to time. How did this happen? Well, she actually ended up randomly befriending She-Hulk at a bakery and came to know the rest of the team through the Wasp and Eros, who attempted to crash one of her famous parties. CIRCE would end up aiding Captain America on a few adventures and team up with the Avengers for a time. In fact, this is where she met Dane Whitman and fell in love with him. And friends, if you are loving this list and you need more Eternals lists so you can brush up on your knowledge and get ready for the movie, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, let us know, what more you want to learn from Eternals. There's lots to know. And although I've heard a lot of people being like, I don't know how I feel about this movie, I personally think Eternals is going to be so hype, and you're definitely going to want this knowledge. Trust me. I think you're going to want it. Now if the movie's bad, everyone's going to come back to me and be like, Amanda, you said this. You said it was gonna be good, you promised. I hope it's good. I really want it to be good. Number 5, Down with the Sickness. I'm not gonna sing it, but it's playing in my head. The Eternals began to get concerned for CIRCE's well-being when she adopted a more aggressive attitude, method, and persona, even going so far as to kill villains that opposed her. That's not what heroes do. The Eternals believed she was suffering from a mental illness referred to as the Mad Weary. The Eternals were susceptible to it due to their long lifespans. Despite being physically immortal, mentally it was possible for them to lose their minds due to just living so long, which honestly sounds like it would very much be a real thing if you lived forever. Number 4, Soulmate. Dane Whitman would not just end up as CIRCE's lover of his own free will, but would also kind of be forcibly tied to her by the Eternals through a soul uniting process. Basically, CIRCE imprinted on the Black Knight, making him her Gan-Josen, her soulmate. Or her Gan-Yosen? I like to say Gan-Josen because it kind of sounds like chosen. From then on, their souls would be forever linked together. This was done because the Eternals believed it would help to calm and soothe CIRCE. Hopefully, it would cure the Mad Weary, which they believed she was suffering from. The controversial part of this was that although Dane was attracted to CIRCE, he was also in love with Crystal, and overall he didn't really get much of a say in this matter. I mean, I don't think he was really against the idea, but it was definitely more of like a commitment than I think he was prepared for. I feel like he kind of did it because he was like, well, I guess I have to. Alright. Number 3, Proctor. CIRCE's relationship with the Black Knight was made even more complicated by the existence of Proctor, an evil and ruthless version of Dane from an alternate reality. This version of Dane Whitman had been spurned and rejected by his own CIRCE, and so with a broken heart, he did what anyone would do, any normal person, traverse the multiverse so that he might kill every single version of her that had ever existed. I mean, this seems like a huge overreaction, right? Proctor could have just watched some sad romantic movies, cried a little, got a little plant to care for, focused on loving himself more, and when he was ready, just put himself out there again. But no, this is comics, so kill all versions of CIRCE across the multiverse it is. Because of how relentless he was, CIRCE of Earth 616 would eventually be forced to kill Proctor using his own sword, the Ebony Blade. Number 2, Death and Rebirth. CIRCE more recently died in the comics alongside her fellow Eternals. They discovered the truth of their purpose on Earth, which was much more sinister than they'd been led to believe, having dedicated their lives to a cause which they thought was noble, only to learn their belief in what was motivating them was actually false. Driven mad by this revelation, CIRCE and the other Eternals began to take their own lives / kill one another. Eternals, it turns out, are only immortal to a point. However, they are still eternal, as even after this death, they would would be resurrected. CIRCE not only returned, but was also back to 100% mental and physical health. You can see her alongside her fellow Eternals in their newest series from 2021. Number 1. Matter manipulation. As was implied much earlier on in this list when we talked about the story of Circe and Odysseus, Circe is an extremely powerful being, especially as she can transmute matter, organic and inorganic, I believe, meaning that she can even turn humans or other beings into different creatures. She can use her transmutation power to heal, and at one point actually used these powers to turn herself into Makari after she had failed to protect him and he seemingly died. And if you don't know, Makari's another Eternal. So that's pretty important. She not only transmuted her body, but with some help also managed to replace her consciousness, her essence with his own. She literally became Makari. It's pretty crazy. I think that's a pretty crazy power. I don't know.